we both play like baseball, softball, and when you haven't played in a while, you want to hit that double, right? Like you're coming back from an injury or something. Like you want to hit that double because the second you hit that double is the second you stop thinking about all of your mechanics, right? Because I think that's what he's thinking. Like, do I have my foot right? Like, am I in the right place? You can see him thinking about it a lot when he's out there because he just hasn't done it in a while. And he needs to, like, I guess the football equivalent of doubles, like hit a hole shot and cover two, like, and just kind of slip it in there so you can be like, oh, okay, cool, I got it. Like, and then you can move on with it. I wonder from like Kevin Stefanski's standpoint, it's a risky thing to try to call, but like, do you think he's mindful of like the mental part of this hurdle for Deshaun, which is he needs to make a play in order to feel like, not like a one where Donovan's wide open on the underneath and anybody can make it. He needs to make a play. In his mind, he feels like Deshaun Watson can only make that play, for him to feel like himself again. Okay, so I always try to make sure I bring on Cam at least like every 4 weeks because she's down there. She's asking the questions. You hear her voice in the press conference. So she is, I don't know if insider's the right term, but she's down there every day. She's watching the team practice, especially when it comes to the Browns. It's been an interesting couple of weeks as it's been the looming, like Thanos and the Avengers, right? Where it's like, oh, Deshaun's coming. This is the one. He's coming. And then he finally shows up. And then now it's like, okay, now we're trying to get our way into this Deshaun era. Has it felt as weird as it's felt for like the fans moving like from like two eras in one season as it has for this locker room?
It kind of does feel like a whole new season. It's so strange. I think in the locker room, a lot of the guys obviously we're playing really hard for Jacoby Brissett. They really appreciate Jacoby Brissett. And he's just been this figure in the locker room of like the guy that you just love. And you can't help but to love him. And now that Deshaun Watson's back, he's the guy that, a lot of these guys were looking forward to playing with because of his just elite talent. And they want to see what they're able to do with him under center. So I think with him back in here, that kind of changed the mindset a little bit. Not that they weren't, sold and bought in and playing for Jacoby, but I mean, this is like, if they're not playing at their best right now and moving forward, even though he shakes some rust off with Deshaun Watson, then what is your team even? Like there was all these expectations when they made that trade for him. And I think people in the locker room understand that. And so it does make it feel a little different, but it feels like, first of all, the longest season I've ever seen. With everything that's happened, it feels like some of these things were like a year ago and they were just a couple weeks ago. Like it's so weird to like think back. And
11-5 feels like a decade ago, right? It was just a couple seasons ago.
It's so crazy how time has moved with the Browns lately. But I think this is just another part of that. And it's really like it's a new era, but it does feel like a new part of the season that will probably bleed into the rest of the offseason into next season. But this is where it starts.
So I'm wondering with because there's going to be a lot of like reaction to his game, to how Deshaun played on Sunday, right? The numbers were not overwhelming or like objectively good. But there are going to be people who run with it one way or the other. Oh, it's nothing, or oh, it's definitely something. He's not the same player. Inside that locker room, is this a feeling of like you just had to get comfortable and we're gonna be good? Like there's still that confidence that Deshaun Watson is gonna be the guy who can still take over this season at this point with them, or are they more hesitant to where it's like, hey, it might take some time there?
I think they are still, pretty confident that he's going to be able to flip the switch because you see him at practice and he is just, it's one or the other, right? Like he'll have those days of rust. And a lot of the times it was, especially during like training camp throughout the summer, when new revelations about his off-field things were coming out weekly, that next day that they would come out, the next day he would look off. He would look shaken. And he didn't look like the Deshaun Watson that everyone expected to see. Now, a couple days later, after he got out of his head, he'd be just throwing darts, throwing lasers, just that, like, you would see why the Browns went out and did what they did and got him, because you see that talent. I think that's the same. I mean, that's the same thing here. And I always, from the moment he was given that 11-game suspension, and they said, Texans game is when he returns, always felt like he was going to come back and not look great. And I always felt like the fan base was going to be a little crazy about it. And I was like, yeah, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. And still people, I think, maybe were a little surprised because they were overly optimistic. That's not reality, right? Like, he's going to have that rust. And so I think that what we saw from training camp and how he was kind of in his head, shaken up a bit and having to get back, that's what is happening now. That was a huge emotional game for him. It had a lot of implications for him, and it was a lot of pressure. Even if the Browns weren't necessarily the ones putting it on, there's a lot of pressure. It was his debut game in a regular season for the Browns against his former team, where all of this stuff went down, where he's got people booing him and also people cheering for him. And it's pretty unprecedented. Like, something like this nature really hasn't happened the way that this happened with Deshaun Watson. So it's not like there was anyone to even talk to about what to expect and how to go about it. Yep. So I think that is what you saw is emotions mixed with 2 years off, mixed with excitement and nervousness, even though he won't claim nerves. You could see there were some nerves in there. And I mean, he's a human being. Of course there were. And so I think that the team understands that, knows what he has gone through, because they've seen it. They've been there firsthand. They've been asked about it every single day, basically, since he got here. And so they know. And I think that it's okay, absolutely don't worry about that. Shake it off. We'll see what he's got next year. We're still confident that he's going to be able to bounce back. I think if the rust is still there against the Bengals, then maybe some guys will start to think maybe it's going to take a little bit longer than we had hoped for. Maybe this is, but right now, I think that was to be expected. And now you just hope that one game is enough to shake that rust off, and you start to see that Deshaun Watson in his true form getting into the game against the Bengals.
One of the things that's interesting when I looked at the tape was, I think when we say the term rust, I think we're going to also add in things like, the game was moving fast to him and all that. I didn't really see that the game looked like it was moving super fast to him. It seemed like everything was going at a good pace for him. It felt like his mechanics were rusty. Like, he just didn't have those mechanics down pat yet. And some of his muscle memory was a bit off. It's funny. I was talking to Dave about this, where it's like, when you first get on TV, you don't understand how long 30 seconds is, but it's a long time to be out there. When you're on live, it's like, hey, you got the amount of time you think you got. It's just not going to feel like it. Right. And I think that's kind of what was going on with him, where his clock was he was expecting it to be faster. Right. And then it felt so much, I don't want to say slower, but it felt like it took so much longer for certain things to get there that he just got weird, and he felt weird with it. I also feel too, we both play baseball, softball. And when you haven't played in a while, you want to hit that double, right? You're coming back from an injury or something. You want to hit that double, because the second you hit that double is the second you stop thinking about all of your mechanics, right? Because I think that's what he's thinking. Do I have my foot right? Am I in the right place? You could see him thinking about it a lot when he's out there, because he just hasn't done it in a while. And he needs to I guess the football equivalent of doubles, hit a whole shot and cover two, and just kind of slip it in there. So you can okay, cool, I got it. And then you can move on with it. I wonder from Kevin Stefanski's standpoint, it's a risky thing to try to call, but do you think he's mindful of the mental part of this hurdle for Deshaun, which is he needs to make a play in order to feel not a one where Donovan's wide open on the underneath and anybody can make it. He needs to make a play. In his mind, he feels like Deshaun Watson can only make that play, for him to feel like himself again.
Yeah, I think so. I think, honestly, and it was an unfortunate situation of how it played out, the way that they used Deshaun Watson and the way that they put the offense out there against the Texans, that ball to Anthony Schwartz, everyone's like, why is he targeting Anthony Schwartz? Why is he even out there? Deshaun Watson and Anthony Schwartz have probably the most work together of any of the receivers. I mean, when Deshaun Watson was moved into taking the second team reps and moved down and they were moving Jacoby Brissett up, Anthony Schwartz was the guy that was always working with Deshaun Watson. And that was the guy that he was connecting with him very well. So I think that's like Kevin Stefanski definitely was like, all right, how can we position Deshaun to make a big play? And I think that was like that was the move, right? It was find Anthony Schwartz, because while maybe Anthony Schwartz is obviously not like the top tier receiver on the roster when you've got Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's the guy that Deshaun Watson has been able to really get the most work in with. And so realistically speaking, if you have that connection and it's a little bit further along than Amari Cooper or Donovan Peoples-Jones, then you can maybe feel more confident that there's going to be a play that can be made there. And there almost was. I mean, Anthony Schwartz had that ball. He caught that ball. That would have been a really nice, like, stepping stone for Deshaun to build off of. He just unfortunately fumbled the ball and that kind of spiraled. So it kind of went away from what they maybe intended. But I do think that's part of what Kevin Stefanski hopes to do. And now that Anthony Schwartz is on IR, that's no longer an option. And also, but you have another week, and you've had this game reps too. He was looking to find Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones. So you've got a little bit of work in the game there from the Texans going into this next week of practice, 2 full weeks of being first team reps with them. That connection has looked really good. He's been trying to figure out that next wide receiver with Schwartz out. They're figuring that out, whether it's going to be Felton, Mike Woods, who it's going to be. Today was a little rocky there. Demetric Felton looked like that's kind of the better connection. They also had more, but I think the way that he's been able to work with Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones, yeah, you can definitely start to implement them in that kind of plan of, all right, here's what we can do to make this happen. Get this play, get him feeling good. And they are more reliable at the end of the day. Amari Cooper is probably going to be the guy that does that makes that play, that routes himself open, because we know how elite he is and finding himself open. Kevin Stefanski's also been great at calling plays to get these guys open. And the way that I've seen them progress past couple days really, and has been a really nice connection building with Deshaun Watson and Amari Cooper. And of course it is, because I mean, that's an easy connection to make. Jacoby's first connection because it's Amari Cooper. I think it'll be Deshaun's strongest. And I think you'll see Stefanski trying to like implement something that gets that a really explosive play to get him like feeling good about himself.
Yeah, because I feel like they missed that opportunity in the first game when he threw that interception, because he didn't trust his eye discipline enough to hold that safety long enough to get Amari Cooper on that post. So it ended up getting intercepted and going the exact opposite way you want it. But he's got to throw some of those, right? Like the ideal is like, you need to have him feel like I am back, right? Like whether it's going to be a big run play or something, because a lot of this is confidence, right? Like a lot of this is just trusting your body to do what it's done for years. And if you don't trust it, you're not going to be that guy anymore. And I think Kevin has to be mindful of that when he scripts these game plans, because it's like, hey, we need him to feel like him. And it needs to happen sooner than later, because you don't want this to build up on top of itself, because that's how he can become a different player. You just, whether it's a throwing play or a running play, like just put him in a position to make a play, I think, early. And I think all of a sudden he will look a little bit less rusty, just because he'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can still do this. Because he never got that moment in that game. He had like small bursts where he almost got there. You saw the run play, right, where he got, I think, like 8 yards on like a 3rd and 11. He almost broke it, and you can see him slap the turf. He's like, he almost had it, right? Like he felt like he was almost there, but he never got that moment. And if he gets that moment early in this game, I think this is going to be good for the Browns. It's all about when does he finally get that part to where he's like, okay, all right, 700 days, whatever. I still can play football, because that's got to be in your head if you haven't played in a while, you know?
I think, and we're still figuring out who Deshaun Watson, the person, is too. And that's because you've been very limited about how much you're able to be around him and see him and operate like that. But I do, from what I've seen, I really do think that Deshaun Watson is a very mentally game-based guy. I think that's something that really drives him. And I think that when he gets in a groove, he can get in a groove, and that's going to fuel him. I think that you see the days where he's kind of in his head and he's not looking great. That was like, it would continue throughout the practice and he would be in his head. But then as soon as he clicked, that's all you saw was just like that Deshaun. And I think that's something too. Like, I mean, once you get that and he clicks, I think that he said it today. He said, it when it clicks and everyone will be able to tell. And like, that's, I think, who he is. I think he's the guy that he's going to get through it, got to get himself in a momentum, in a groove. And then once he finds it, I mean, then he can ride that wave. And it's about making that play. So if the Browns are smart, they'll do exactly what you're like. You want a game plan? You want to get on the phone?
Like, Kevin, just let Deshaun make plays early. That's my contribution to this meeting. But I do think it's important because, like, one, it's important for Deshaun. And what's important, what is good for him on the football field is ultimately going to be positive for this team on the football field, right? And with him, if he does get that play going, and he starts doing the flexing and the screaming, and his teammates look at him like, oh, he feels like he's back. All of a sudden, they feel like this is a different game now, right? Now they're not playing with rusty Deshaun Watson. They're like, oh no, that's Watson. That's number 4 over there, right? So it's about kind of, that's how he can inspire confidence. But in order to inspire confidence, he has to be confident. And how do you get somebody confident? Success. That's why confidence is tough. That's why not everybody has it. Like, you know what I mean? But that's, if you're Kevin, you got to make sure you put him in the best position possible. This is a great week, a division opponent you've had success against. They're not a bad team, but you know how to scheme things against this defense. And, if Watson trusts you and he makes the right read, and he's been making the right read, if he just gets his feet right on that one play, can change everything for the rest of the game. And that's what they need, right? If that happens early in this game, I think the Browns are going to have a much easier, much better chance of winning it. But if it does not happen in this game, then they got bigger problems going forward, because now you're talking about, it's not just going to be one play that changes everything for him, right? Now we got to have a number of plays. He has to have a number of, in like a super good game, in order for him to feel that way. And it's hard to get that when you're not super confident in yourself, right? So this is about making sure you avoid having that mental mountain to climb, and you don't want this to go into the offseason. You need him to have a good game before you go into the offseason, because a lot of his stuff in practice is just like, am I still good? Like, is this still right? He's unsure because he hasn't done it in a while. And you need him to feel sure about what he's doing in the offseason in order to get the best out of him next season.
Yeah, I think in the 2 games that were his first 2 games, the Texans game, really great game for him to come back. Not so much with the emotions that came with it. I think that was in his head a lot, and that a lot of pressure. But relatively speaking, a really good game for him to come back, because the Texans are the Texans, and the defense and special teams were able to carry them to a win over the Texans, because they're a 1-win team, and they looked like it.
They bad
on Sunday. It was rough. Bad. It was really bad.
He threw an interception on a screen pass, y'all. Pick 6? A screen pass. But
hey, Tony Fields. What a moment.
I had Jackson flashbacks. I was like, oh, boy, I remember what it's like to be this.
Well, I've been there, done that, seen that. No, I think the Bengals game, though, is the next one where it's a tough game, right? It's Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase is back in the mix. It's a tough matchup. They look good. But it's good for Deshaun Watson, because the Browns play the Bengals well, and the defense plays the Bengals well. And I think that of any game for it to be maybe like another quarter or a half where he's shaking it off a little bit, still getting in the groove, if Deshaun Watson can flip the switch by, even if it's not all the way on, but just really take that next step to getting back to himself. If he can do that before the first half, or by the first half of the Bengals game, I think that the Browns are in a really good spot to win that game. I think that if it goes the entire game, not so much, but the defense plays the Bengals well. They are very excited for these matchups. Now, the last game, they didn't have Jamar Chase, but they played Jamar Chase before. They've been able to lock him down. And I think that continues. They've been really good. The secondary's been really great at that. And I think the big question will be just that run game situation with getting the run stops. But and my concern is that linebacker. But if they can figure that out, if they can,
we are on our 4th Mike linebacker at this point.
It's rough. So it's really rough. They there's so many guys just circulating through. I'm like, okay, who is it? Okay, Deion Jones is going to do it. Jordan Caness is going to do
Kevin
it.
said,
Okay,
man, we're not sure who's going to start at Mike, Deion Jones or Kuziak. I was like, oh boy.
Joe Woods was like, is that how I say his name? Did I say it right? Like, if you're on the guy that you're like not sure how to say his name, like, whew, you've been through it. You've been through the ringer. But that said, they've been through the ringer and they know what it. Now they should know what it takes to adjust and move a guy in there. And Deion Jones has Mike experience, and they had him doing that a couple times when he first got here. So no excuses there. But that is the area I think it could end up being a little bit like the Dolphins game, where they had the receivers locked down and the passing game was meh, but they just figured out that run game. They've got the kind of the data, the blueprint of what not to do now. So maybe that can help. That's the concern. But if Deshaun, so the defense has all the potential to hold off the Bengals just enough, I think, to keep them in the game. Special teams isn't going to do what they did last week. I mean, it was an incredible game from them, and you hope they play solid. But to ask that to happen again, that doesn't happen. And the defense scoring 2 times, that's probably not going to happen. But right. you need a solid effort still, and I think they can put up a solid effort enough for Deshaun Watson to be able to have some leeway in the first part of the game and try to get back in the groove that way.
Definitely, Cam. Thank you for coming on talking football with us. Now we're going to switch to some basketball coverage. So if you want to check out what Cam has to say about these Cavaliers, make sure you subscribe to the Cavs Burner. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. But we're going to jump over there and talk about some